Every phone in your pocket, every laptop on your desk, every electric car quietly charging in a driveway tonight, they almost all run on the same basic thing. Not silicon, not copper, not aluminum. A lithium battery. It is one of the most important inventions of the modern world, and it has one embarrassing, stubborn weakness that has never really gone away. It hates the cold. Take a standard electric car out into a deep winter freeze and watch what happens. The range drops, the charging slows, and if it gets cold enough, the battery essentially gives up. That is not a software glitch or a bad brand. That is chemistry, and for decades it has been treated as a law of nature. You simply have to design around. Lithium batteries are so central to how we live that we rarely stop to think about their limits. They power the devices in your hands and the cars on the road, and the entire clean energy transition is, in a very real sense, betting everything on them getting better. So, when a team of Chinese scientists published a paper in the journal Nature in late February 2026, claiming they had built a battery that keeps working in cold so extreme it would leave an ordinary electric car dead, and when that result came wrapped in headlines calling it something the West was never meant to see, that was worth paying attention to. If you love watching technology quietly rewrite the rules of what is possible, hit like and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Now let us get into it, because the real story is stranger and more honest than the headline suggests. Why nobody fixed this sooner? To understand why this matters, you first have to understand why it was so hard. Battery engineers have spent years chasing two goals at the same time, and those two goals have always seemed to pull against each other. The first goal is energy density, which is just how much energy you can pack into every kilogram of battery. More energy density means longer range, lighter cars, smaller devices. The second goal is cold weather performance, keeping that energy usable when the temperature crashes. For a very long time, improving one seemed to cost you the other. You could have a high-energy battery or a cold-tolerant one, but not both in the same cell. The reason is buried deep in the chemistry, in the part of the battery almost nobody talks about, the electrolyte. That is the liquid inside every cell that carries lithium ions back and forth as the battery charges and discharges. For decades, electrolyte solvents have been built around oxygen-based coordination. Lithium salts dissolve in carbonate solvents through an interaction between lithium and oxygen, and that interaction is the foundation that makes the whole thing work. But it comes with a hidden cost. That oxygen-based system needs a lot of solvent, which puts a ceiling on how much energy you can pack in. And the very same strong interaction that dissolves the salt also drags on the process at the electrode surface, which is exactly what makes batteries choke in the cold. Conventional lithium batteries land around 300 watt-hours per kilogram at room temperature, and that number plummets to below 150 at minus 20 degrees Celsius. Commercial batteries generally fall somewhere in the range of 100 to 300 watt-hours per kilogram, and their conventional electrolytes usually stop working entirely before you even reach minus 50. Researchers had tried to chip away at the problem for years, but the fundamental recipe stayed the same. The question nobody had fully cracked was surprisingly simple. What if the problem was not the lithium, not the design of the cell, but the oxygen at the very heart of the electrolyte itself? The element that changed everything. The team that took on that question came out of Nankai University in Tianjin, working alongside the Shanghai Institute of Space Power Sources, and their move was radical. Instead of tweaking the oxygen-based system, they threw it out. They replaced oxygen-based coordination with a fluorine-coordinated one. Here is why that is clever. Lithium binds more weakly to fluorine than it does to oxygen, and weaker binding means the ions move more freely, even when everything around them wants to freeze into a useless sludge. The team designed and synthesized a series of new fluorinated hydrocarbon solvent molecules, built around a core solvent called 1,3-difluoropropane. In doing so, they challenged an assumption the field had treated as settled for a very long time: the belief that fluorinated hydrocarbons simply could not dissolve lithium salts at high enough concentrations to be useful. They pushed that dissolution above 2 moles per liter, straight through a wall the industry thought was solid. And the numbers that came out the other side are the reason this made headlines around the world. The lab cells reached around 700 watt-hours per kilogram at room temperature, with one detailed account citing the paper putting the peak at 707. Set that against the roughly 300 watt-hours per kilogram of a conventional battery, and you are looking at more than double. But room temperature is the easy part. The stunning result is what happened when they turned the temperature down. The battery held roughly 400 watt-hours per kilogram at minus 50 degrees Celsius, and it continued operating all the way down to minus 70. Sit with that comparison for a moment. At minus 50 degrees, a temperature that kills an ordinary battery outright, this experimental cell was still delivering more energy per kilogram than many commercial batteries manage at comfortable room temperature. The paper backs the cold claim with hard electrochemical figures. The electrolyte showed a low viscosity of 0.95 centipoise, oxidation stability above 4.9 volts, and ionic conductivity of 0.29 millisiemens per centimeter at minus 70 degrees Celsius. That last number is the one that matters most, because ionic conductivity at temperature is basically a measure of whether ions can still move when everything wants to lock solid. Here, they still could. One honest note, because a lot of coverage gets this wrong. The battery maintains that roughly 400 watt-hours per kilogram at minus 50. At minus 70, it continues to operate, but that is not the same as full performance at minus 70. Strong performance holds at minus 50, and the cell keeps functioning at minus 70. Those are two different claims, and mixing them up is how honest science turns into hype. The people behind it, and where it is really aimed. The lead names on this work tell you something about its ambitions. There is Chen Jun, an academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and executive vice president of Nankai University. There is Professor Zhao Qing, also at Nankai's College of Chemistry. And there is Li Yong, a researcher at the Shanghai Institute of Space Power Sources. The paper's first author was a doctoral student named Longqing Wu. That Shanghai Institute deserves a closer look, because it reframes the entire project. It sits under the 8th Academy of the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation. In other words, this is an organization that builds power sources for space. Suddenly, a battery that works at minus 70 degrees looks less like a car accessory and more like what it may really be. A battery built for the places most batteries were never meant to go. Chen Jun made that explicit. In his words, high-energy batteries using this electrolyte have vast potential in new energy vehicles, embodied intelligent robots and the low-altitude economy, as well as in polar regions, aerospace, and aviation. Notice that cars are only the first item on that list. Polar regions, aerospace. Places where a dead battery is not an inconvenience, it is a catastrophe. He also said something that cuts against the image of academics chasing publications for their own sake. "We can't always stay in the ivory tower," he said. "Our goal is to address real industrial challenges." Which brings us to the phrase stamped on this story, the claim that this was a battery the West was never meant to see. The secret that was published for the whole world to read. Let us deal with that framing honestly, because the facts do not support the conspiracy version. This discovery was published in Nature. Nature is one of the most widely read scientific journals on Earth, freely accessible to researchers everywhere. There is nothing hidden about a paper deliberately shared with the entire global scientific community. If China had wanted to keep this a secret, publishing it in Nature would be the single worst possible way to do it. But there's a real strategic story here. It is just about something else entirely. China does restrict battery technology, and aggressively. In July 2025, it added certain EV battery production technologies and lithium processing techniques to its export control list. In October 2025, its Ministry of Commerce announced controls covering lithium batteries, graphite anode materials, and the related manufacturing equipment and technology, requiring licenses for a set of key battery manufacturing methods. And the leverage behind those controls is staggering. China holds roughly 70% of the global EV battery market and about 65% of global lithium processing capacity. It makes an estimated 94% of the world's LFP battery capacity and refines around 70% of the world's lithium. 4 of the 5 largest battery equipment makers are Chinese, and the world's top supplier of that equipment is Chinese as well. So here is the accurate version of the secret. China openly publishes its cutting-edge research. It wants the world to know its scientists broke a rule the field thought was unbreakable. What it guards is the industrial capacity to actually mass produce at scale. The equipment, the manufacturing know-how, the processing. The knowledge is shared, the ability to build is controlled. That gap is the real story, and it is far more interesting than any invented secret. There is one more wrinkle worth watching. On the 7th of November 2025, China actually suspended those export controls, opening a one-year window that runs until the 10th of November, 2026, following trade talks with the United States. So the restriction picture is not fixed. It is a lever being pulled and released, and whether it snaps back is a question worth keeping an eye on. The rest of the industry is not standing still. Nankai is not operating alone. CATL, China's battery heavyweight, has shown its own cold weather engineering, including fast charging from 20% to 95% in around 9 minutes at -30 degrees Celsius, and a high-density battery it claims can offer up to around 1,500 kilometers of range. A separate Chinese automaker, Chery, has shown a prototype solid-state battery module at roughly 600 watt-hours per kilogram, targeting commercialization in 2027. So this is not a lone spike, it is a wave, with different players attacking the same problem from different directions. But I have to be straight with you about how the comparisons are sometimes framed, because there is a trap in it. You will see the Nankai cells 700 watt-hours per kilogram set against commercial packs at around 250 to 255 watt-hours per kilogram and presented as a near threefold leap. That is not wrong, but it is not apples to apples either. The 700 figure is a laboratory cell. The 250 to 255 figure is a full commercial pack, and packs always come in lower than bare cells once you add all the structure around them. The real-world gap is smaller than the headline suggests. And that leads straight into the caveats, which the responsible coverage keeps front and center, and so will we. First and most important, this is a laboratory achievement. The 700 watt-hour figure comes from lab pouch cells, not production packs. Nothing about this ships to a dealership tomorrow. Second, cycle life. Lithium metal batteries have historically struggled with durability and safety, meaning how many times you can charge and discharge them before they degrade. The research emphasizes stability, but long-term, independent, real-world validation of durability is not something we can claim from what has been published so far. Third, cost. There is no public pricing data. Fluorinated solvents are involved, and we have no figures on what this costs to make or whether it can be produced affordably at scale. There is also a separate set of claims you should keep at arm's length. Coverage often ties this to a reported collaboration with FAW's Hongqi brand on a 500 watt-hour per kilogram battery, with claims of over 1,000 kilometers of range and mass production targeted for the end of 2026. But those are automaker-sourced numbers, from companies with an obvious incentive to sound impressive. The Nature paper is peer-reviewed science. Those production claims belong in a very different category of confidence. So, how big could this actually get? Put it all together, and the honest shape of the story comes into focus. On the science, this is a genuine, peer-reviewed breakthrough that broke an assumption the field had treated as a law for years. If it scales, it points toward electric vehicles that keep their range in brutal winters, robots that work in the cold, and power sources for polar and aerospace environments where existing batteries simply fail. On the timeline to your driveway, the boldest promises are still unproven, and the road from a lab pouch cell to a mass-produced pack is long, expensive, and full of ways to fail. But let us tie it back to where we started. This is one battery that reaches around 700 watt-hours per kilogram in the lab and keeps working down to -70 degrees Celsius. And no, it was not a secret the West was never meant to see. It was printed in Nature for the entire world to read. What China actually guards is not the idea. It is the machinery and the manufacturing muscle to turn ideas like this into millions of cells, backed by a supply chain it dominates from lithium refining to the equipment on the factory floor. The knowledge is open. The capacity to build it at scale is the real prize. And whether the rest of the world can close that gap is the question the next few years will answer. If this changed how you think about the battery inside almost everything you own, give it a like, and subscribe for more stories about the technologies quietly reshaping the world. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If a discovery this big was published in plain sight, freely available to anyone who cared to read it, what other breakthroughs do you think are sitting in the open right now, just waiting for someone to notice?